Welcome to the Volpe Report podcast, the state's premier public affairs show dedicated to the topics that matter most to Pennsylvanians. I'm your host, Chuck Volpe. Join us now as we speak to this week's guest.
The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We welcome back to this week's show Pennsylvania Auditor General Tim DeFoor. As you probably remember, but it bears repeating since he's up for re-election now, Tim hails from Dauphin County in central Pennsylvania, although his roots extended to Ohio and West Virginia through his parents, who were both blue-collar union workers. Tim's educational background is diverse and extensive. He holds a degree in paralegal studies from Harrisburg Area Community College. Tim has a special fondness for community colleges and has made that and the recruitment of those students part of his tenure as Auditor General. Tim then went on to get his bachelor's degree in psychology from the Pennsylvania State University, and from there went on to earn additional degrees in sociology and history from the University of Pittsburgh. Not done, Tim went on to earn his master's degree in project management from Harrisburg University of Science and Technology. He started his career in public service as a special investigator with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Office of Inspector General, where he investigated government and contractor fraud, waste, and abuse within state government. Tim then went on to become a special agent for the Attorney General's Office of Pennsylvania, investigating Medicaid fraud and illegal prescription drug diversion. Later, he became a fraud investigator and internal auditor for the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, also known as UPMC, one of the biggest health networks in the country. In 2015, Tim was elected as Dauphin County Controller, and in 2020, Tim went on to become the first African American or person of color to win an election statewide in Pennsylvania. He also became the first Republican elected Auditor General since Barbara Hafer in 1989. On this week's show, we will discuss his 4 years in office, his audits of school districts and how they play fast and loose with regulations, resulting in higher property taxes for Pennsylvania taxpayers. We'll also discuss his audit of pharmacy benefit managers and their hidden fees, which are devastating independent mom-and-pop pharmacies. We'll also discuss his audit of the Pennsylvania Turnpike and their collection problem.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Auditor General, welcome to the Volpe Report.
Chuck, thank you for having me on your show. Great to be here.
Yeah, you've been on a couple times, and not only after your historic election originally, but I think we did kind of a midterm how you were doing with your agenda items, which you were well involved working toward. And now you're here again, and I can't believe it's already 4 years since you were first here as the newly minted, I think it was Auditor General-elect when you were first on the show. Where did that time go?
It just, I was told that it was going to go quick. I didn't realize it was going to go this quick. So, but no, even though it's going quickly, it's definitely been a privilege and an honor to serve as Auditor General.
Well, I'd like to say that something I know we spoke over the summer, and I'd like to say now, for the record, what I said to you privately then. In my time and having gotten to know a couple of Auditor Generals, I mean, look, our very own former Democratic Governor Bob Casey was an Auditor General, and then his son, our United States Senator, was an Auditor General, and there have been some really, really good ones in now my 60-plus years on the planet that I've had the benefit of getting to know. I would put your record so far of accomplishment to the front of the class. You have been, as I told you, as productive an Auditor General as we have had. You have delivered on your promises and then some. So, as I said, I'm a fan of what you have done, and I'm very pleased to have you back as you're now running for re-election to that office.
Yeah, and Chuck, I appreciate that. Look, I've spent my entire 30 plus year career as either a law enforcement officer investigating government fraud, waste, and abuse. The other half I spent as an auditor, making sure that government funds were spent the way they're supposed to be spent, and making sure that our taxpayers are comfortable and are assured that government is doing what they're supposed to be doing with its taxpaying dollars, and that this is probably the most important thing, that government is transparent with taxpayer dollars.
You're very proud of your roots in your background, and your initial education came at the community college level, and you just recently did a tour of and gave a speech at Luzerne Community College right here in this media market. And one of the emphases in your office, and I want you to expound on this, is your recruitment of auditors from community colleges. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, and first of all, as far as I'm a graduate of Harrisburg Area Community College. I wasn't a very good student coming out of high school. And it was at Harrisburg Area Community College where a professor and other professors knew that I was struggling, and they actually took they guided me. They talked about how I could be a good student, how I could succeed, that I could succeed at that community college and other community college and other colleges. And it was because of them that my confidence, my academic confidence grew. And if it wasn't for those professors, one in particular, that gave me the encouragement and the confidence to be a good student, then quite frankly, I would not be here. So I felt that it was only right, once I got elected as Auditor General, to reach back to the community college level and recruit students graduating from community college. And one of the reasons is you have some brilliant students coming out of community colleges. We visited most of them in the Commonwealth. As you said, we just at Luzerne, and tomorrow we are actually going to be at Montgomery County Community College talking about career opportunities within the Department of the Auditor General. Previously, you would have to have a bachelor's degree in accounting to get a job as an auditor here. Well, we decided to open up our efforts and open it up to not only students in different career fields, but also opening up to community college students as well. And I really look forward to the day when we hire our first student who has graduated from community college, because I would put community college students up against any student in the Commonwealth.
Let's talk about, before we get into some of your things that we had not talked about earlier, one of the things we talked about, not only as Auditor General-elect, but after your kind of midterm review, was financial literacy. That's something you were a big proponent of. And I'd like you first to kind of remind our viewers what that is and how your efforts in that area have produced results.
So one of the things that we did for the past decade, even when we're going to go back 10 years, I've always been passionate about financial literacy because financial literacy is a life skill. And my personal feeling has always been that it should be taught from kindergarten through 12th grade in every school in Pennsylvania. Reason being is you teach a kid financial literacy, by the time he graduates from high school, he is going to be a smarter and a more educated consumer and is going to make better choices. Who is that going to impact? That's going to impact the Commonwealth and the community that he lives in, or that they live in, because they're going to have better credit. They can buy a house, they can buy a car. So it has its impact. So one of the things that we decided to do here was to be an advocate for financial literacy. So we created the Be Money Smart Financial Literacy Initiative. And it started out by going out across the Commonwealth, speaking with organizations who promote, in some cases, teach financial literacy, but also going to the high schools where financial literacy in some cases has been taught or had been taught for decades. See, some high schools weren't waiting for legislation to tell them that they had to teach financial literacy. They knew it was important. So some schools, including my old high school, started doing it decades ago. So we went across the Commonwealth, talking to organizations and going to schools where it had been taught, advocating for it. While at the same time, Senator Gephardt in Lebanon County had a piece of legislation, and the legislation was that graduating seniors had to take a half a credit of financial literacy before they could graduate from high school. Legislation went through. Governor Shapiro then signed it into law, making Pennsylvania the 25th state in the country to require that graduating seniors had to take some type of financial literacy before they graduate from high school. And that is, even though I wasn't the one who drafted the legislation, just the fact that we were in this department were champions of financial literacy, champions of that legislation, talked about the importance of financial literacy. The fact that it is now law in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is something that I can't be more proud of. Well, now, even though that's great, I would still love to see it being taught from kindergarten through 12th grade.
Right. Well, one of the things when you hold high executive office, a statewide office in a large state like Pennsylvania, it's a leadership role that doesn't necessarily fall directly in the job description, and it's to use your office as a bully pulpit. I think Teddy Roosevelt said that about being president of the United States, but that applies to mayors, commissioners, governors, auditor generals of Pennsylvania as well. And you should take credit, because the first time I'd ever heard the term financial literacy was from you. And the fact that you made it an issue to get it into legislation, because remember, when you took the office, Josh Shapiro wasn't even governor at that point. That would come 2 years later. But you championed it, and you deserve a lot of credit. Like, we'll give you the assist on it. Maybe the governor scored the layup, but you threaded the needle on the pass and got it done. So we'll give you the assist.
I'll take the assist. But also going back to financial literacy. So the thing about it, when I was in high school, I used to have to take home ec and shop because it was a requirement, because they said it was a life skill. Right. Same thing with financial literacy. It is a life skill. But for those individuals who aren't necessarily don't understand finance or aren't financially literate, we see the results of that when we perform our audits. Right. So it does have a trickle down effect.
You see the result, and I'll use a word that sometimes you'll see is called devastation, is what you'll see. Let me give you an example that happened to be a talking point that we've talked on other areas, and I made a simple, I guess observation would be the word. It's pretty well known now, obviously. We have faced some of the worst inflation in multiple generations, not only in Pennsylvania, but in our country. Interest rates have skyrocketed because of the cost of goods and services. Tim, what we've seen is people, here's a staggering statistic. 3/5 of the American citizens are living paycheck to paycheck, 60%. To get by over this last few years of high inflation, where grocery bills are up 22%, gasoline is up 50%, people have been forced to use credit cards to sometimes pay for basic necessities. I'm talking about mortgage, gasoline, car payments, food. And here's where this comes back to financial literacy. I just got a notification on, I think it might have been my Sears card, it could have been JCPenney, but on one of those credit cards. Now, we already know they charge extremely high interest rates, like in the 20% range. Well, I just got a notification that that particular credit card has gone up to 34.755% interest. And my thought was, getting back to financial literacy, how important it is, people that haven't properly managed their finances and have not handled the inflation situation well and have been forced to then resort to credit cards to charge off on, where do you figure those folks are going to end up trying to pay those off at 34.75%?
They're in debt.
Yeah. And maybe
They're
bankruptcy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But either way, it's not going to be good. It's kind of interesting that you brought that up. And again, this goes back to teaching it in school. I remember going to a school, sitting in on a financial literacy class. What were they discussing? Compound interest. And these were juniors, seniors, and sophomores in high school, and they were learning about compound interest. Again, that's why it's so important, because when they hear about a credit card that has a 33% interest, they understand, number one, do I really need this credit card? Or two, let's try to find a credit card that has a lower interest rate. And by teaching it, they're going to be made, because they're educated on what's going on, they are going to make smarter decisions. And in the long run, that helps everybody. It helps the banks. It helps them. It helps their families. They can then have better credit. With better credit, you can buy a house. You can buy a car. You can make investments. So the understanding and learning about financial literacy, it has a holistic impact on a whole financial ecosystem.
Of course. Well, as you sit now, with the advantage of the incumbency, as an incumbent Auditor General running for re-election, you get the opportunity to run on your record. And as I've already told our viewers, it's been an extraordinary record of accomplishment. But let's talk some specifics now. Let's talk about, and I want to make sure I get the name of this right, there's a state program, the Pharmacy Benefit Managers, that's a state program that you've done an audit on. Now, pharmacy already has suggestions of potential horror stories. People can't afford to go to the pharmacy often. So your audit of that would be obviously very important for people to know about. So talk about that program and what your audit revealed.
So what the audit was pharmacy benefit managers, what they do, they act as a middleman. They act as a middleman for, could be a drug distributor, managed care organization, and for like a Department of Human Services dealing with the Medicaid program. And they are the ones who contract for a particular service to act as a middleman. And if they are doing any business with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, anybody doing business with the Commonwealth, that's tax dollars. And the audit was with regards to Medicaid, which tax dollars are being spent on. So the first thing that you need to do is be transparent about every single fee that you are charging a managed care organization, that you're charging the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services, and that you are charging pharmacies. Our audit was to assure that that was happening, that pharmacy benefit managers' contracts were being monitored, that the claims, pharmacy benefit manager claims were being monitored, and that there were no hidden fees with regards to the independent pharmacies, let's say. But we found that nothing was, contracts weren't being monitored, claims weren't being monitored, and that pharmacy benefit managers were charging independent pharmacies a hidden fee and not informing the managed care organization or the state Department of Human Services. So, and that's something that's been a problem nationwide. I'm going to go back to 2018, where the Ohio State Auditor did an audit, and they identified millions of dollars that were not being reported by pharmacy benefit managers because they were adding on an extra fee, calling it either some type of transmission fee, but the actual term is spread pricing. Right. So we performed this audit and found that, yes, there was spread pricing in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
There's a shocker.
And this is hurting independent pharmacies, because independent pharmacies are getting hit with this fee. Now, you may not think of a few dollars here, a few dollars there, as being a huge impact on pharmacies, especially independent pharmacies. When you're talking about thousands upon thousands of dollars a day, that adds up.
Sure.
And one of the problems that's happening in Pennsylvania with our independent pharmacies is that they are going out of business. And from what I understand, I was just told this by a pharmacist up in the Scranton area, that this past year alone, almost 200 independent mom and pop pharmacies went out of business.
Wow.
And part of that dealt with the spread pricing that pharmacy benefit managers use on independent pharmacies.
I would think that also, even though this is not your jurisdiction, might be jurisdiction for the Attorney General, as far as monopolistic practices, but I would think that because an inherent advantage that the big box stores would have, like CVS and the other national, international, Walgreens type pharmacies, they can probably negotiate, because of the bulk and volumes they deal in, probably better fees than the mom and pop from these add-ons from these pharmacy managers. Is that correct? Or I'm just thinking out loud with you. I don't know that. I'm asking you.
Yeah, so a lot of it depends what's in the contract, but in a lot of it, when you're talking about potential fraudulent issues, that's something that law enforcement would handle.
Right.
But the most important thing is whatever's in the contract. You have to be transparent.
Right.
I mean, no matter what type of fees you have.
Right.
And I don't care if it is an extra fee.
Right.
Be transparent about it.
Right.
Be transparent, and don't put it on the backs of these independent pharmacies. A lot of them are in rural areas. Some are in suburban.
Sure.
Some are in urban areas. And especially when you have a pharmacy in a rural area, they may be the only pharmacy for 15, 20 miles. And if they go out of business, that means that a person who could be on Medicaid, could be on Medicare, who could walk 2 blocks, or the pharmacy may deliver the medications for him. Now this person has to travel 15, 20 miles just to pick up a prescription.
You've done an audit effectively of school districts in their reserves to see if that money is being appropriately spent. So could you talk a little bit about that, what the audit is and what you're finding?
Well, what the audit is that we're school, and again, so all these audits have one thing in mind. One thing, one word, I guess you could say, transparency. And the thing, what we did with the Bureau of the, what the schools were they being transparent with their funds? If a school district had in the reserves a certain amount, and could be a low amount, then if something would happen, then they could apply for an emergency referendum with the Department of Education, meaning that they could raise taxes without putting it out to the voters. Because normally, if you are a school district and you're raise taxes for whatever reason, then you need to put it out to the voters. But what these schools were doing is they were moving around. They had the funds in there to do whatever they needed to do, but they're moving money around to give the appearance that they didn't have any money. Then they would apply for this emergency referendum with the Department of Education, saying that, look, we don't have any money. The Department of Education would grant their waiver or referendum so they could raise taxes without putting it out to the taxpayers.
Wow.
And so that's something that we felt was important to do. And as you said, that audit, it brought a lot of things to light, a lot of things that should have been brought to light.
Well, while on the subject of audits, there's no way that we can not discuss your audit of the Pennsylvania Turnpike and some of its issues. Just so you have some background, I have had leaders in the House and the Senate of Pennsylvania's General Assembly. Marty Flynn in particular, Senator Marty Flynn, has been a particular outspoken critic of uncollected fees and things like that the Turnpike had effectively written off $110 or $120 million of uncollected fees. So talk about your Turnpike audit and what you've been working on there.
Well, that was one of the things that we looked at. Uncollected fees, hundreds of millions of dollars per year that go uncollected. But also we did an overall audit of the Turnpike with regards to debt. The Turnpike has more debt than the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Well,
however, it wasn't the Turnpike being negligent that brought it to that. It was a piece of legislation in which the Turnpike had to give most of its revenue to the Department of Transportation. And when you're giving most of your revenue to another department, you have to take out loans just to operate, which is what the Turnpike did, putting itself in debt. So I know a lot of people like to beat up on the Turnpike, but there is a reason for the Turnpike being in the debt that it was. But as we were did that part of the audit, we also looked at again the fees, and there were just hundreds of $millions of fees that for whatever reason were not being collected. So as a result of our audit, legislation was passed lowering the threshold for an individual who didn't pay their bill when they received it. And if they didn't pay their bill, then their vehicle registration would be suspended. You've
done some significant work in terms of auditing our effectively infrastructure, bridges. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. How are bridges bridges that are in deterioration, how are they being inspected? So we did an audit of that, and we found out that there were some issues. There are some issues with the people inspecting the bridges. And if you are going to inspect a bridge, and I know you probably feel the same way that I do, whoever's going to be inspecting the bridge needs to have the background, training, and education in order to do that.
Right.
Well, we are finding out that in some cases that was not the case.
Wow.
So we performed that audit several months ago, and we did acknowledge that PennDOT has some pretty stringent regulations. Their regulations are tougher than the federal government's. But even though your regulations are tougher than the federal government's, if you're going to have those regulations, Chuck, you have to follow them.
Right.
So our issue was, it's great that you have these regulations, but they're meaningless if you don't follow.
Well, as we wind down, let me say this, General, that as I said earlier, I have just, even in this interview, as I always get the benefit of your time, learning things that an Auditor General does that I would have had no other knowledge of or know about. And hopefully what we have done on this show for our media market, which goes as far west as Williamsport in this state, a lot of people that watch this show will now know what you've been doing for 4 years. And as I said, I don't say lightly that your performance has been as good as I've seen in my lifetime. It has. And I truly hope that you get to keep up the good work. The voters of Pennsylvania will decide that. But your job performance has been extraordinary. So, Tim, it's always a pleasure reacquainting and connecting. And maybe I'll get to do you as a second-term reelected Auditor General in the future.
I look forward to that, Chuck. It's always good being on your show. So thank you.
Godspeed, Tim. Take care. Thanks for joining us for this edition of the Volpe Report podcast. Be sure to visit our YouTube and Facebook pages for upcoming episodes. You can catch up on the Volpe Report podcast on your favorite podcast provider.